So, Drew, welcome to CTO Confessions. It's great to have you on board, sir.
Thank you, TC. Great to be here.
Brilliant. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? Who do you work for?
All right. Thank you. And thanks for having me. Great to be here. Drew Morrell, and I am currently the head of engineering at a company called Workiva. You see here, Workiva is the world's leading cloud platform for transparent reporting. So what does that mean? So we help companies provide transparency to both financial and non-financial metrics and reporting across their business that helps run their business. So you can think of anything from like a regulatory perspective, making submissions to the SEC here in the US and different governing bodies across the world. And so how do companies bring all of their underlying operational data together to ultimately report on how they're doing? And so, historically, we've been sort of that last mile of reporting and filing and submission from a regulatory perspective. But as our company has grown and as the impact of our platform has grown, we've moved much further upstream. So we're helping companies, make business decisions around their operations. You can think of like performance management reporting within like offices of the CFO or other parts of an organization. So our platform powers all of that through like document management capabilities and data management capabilities. And so
Wow.
Really, our ultimate goal is to provide transparency, to allow customers to provide transparency, and to understand their impact, again, whether it be financial or non-financial, managing risk, how they drive growth, how they build trust. We have a really broad footprint. We work with over 6,200 customers. We work with, I think, 85+% of the largest of the Fortune 500. So it's a really impactful platform in terms of what we do and lots of runway ahead.
Brilliant. I love it. And so what do you enjoy most about this space? What's the thing that rocks your boat?
Yeah, I think just inherently what I love is working for product technology companies, right? So and later in my career, that's tended towards like SaaS platform companies. So I really like solving business problems with technology, where technology is the core product. And I like doing that in places where, the people are great, they're smart, they're fun to work with. You're in a growing space, you see the opportunity, you see the success that like a company has, but then you see like the wide open continued success in the future. And so that all those things together really motivate me sort of day to day and get me excited about the opportunity. So particular industry or like specific problem, sure, there are things that I care about or I'm passionate about, but it's more sort of that combination of those inputs together really get me going.
Yeah, love it. And we spoke offline around the importance of not doing tech for tech's sake. I've been there as well, being a techie or I like to call myself a geek that managed to de-geek. Okay. I don't know if you can ever de-geek, but I think sometimes you kind of put it nicely, we're as engineers or techies are out to solve problems. But we're also here to look after this thing called the business.
Right. Yeah, it's one thing that I, continue to like to stress to my team. So we all know we're here for the business, for our customers, and that's what motivates us. And we all understand that, but sometimes we kind of lose that thread a little bit of what that means and like putting ourselves in the position of the users. Like we're working in our product and in our platform all the time, right? We're so close to it. So, I think kind of stepping back and remembering what are the things that what are the problems our customers are trying to solve? Like what, and how are we helping them do that? first and foremost without like jumping straight into the tech and like you said, that sort of complex problem solving. Because as engineers, we get really excited about problems and building things, and sometimes we lose sight of why we're doing that, and then stepping back and also understanding like what's that full experience that our users are going through as they navigate through our platform and try and solve, the problems that they're trying to solve.
Excellent. And I've got here a question around product development, because I know this is something you're quite kind of passionate about. And you mentioned, was it Marty Keegan's product engineering model? Yeah.
Well, yeah, Marty Kagan. He's kind of well known in the product tech space, really from the product management side, so to speak. You might not agree with the way I frame that, but he's a big proponent and kind of helped articulate and frame what's called the product operating model. And a lot of it is stuff we already know and do, but I think, again, a lot of this is about mindset. So thinking about, he's really simplified it in a way of like strategy, like what are the problems we're trying to solve as a business, discovery, how do we want to solve these problems? And when we talk about, like, you always hear like failing fast or those kind of things, like that should really happen in discovery. You shouldn't fail when you work on a project for 6 months and then at the end, it doesn't work, right? You want to do that in discovery. So what are those quick iterative ways that we can incorporate discovery into what we're doing? And then delivery, like how are we building the products, the ultimate products that deliver those solutions? And so it's really thinking about each of those three areas and our approaches within those. But ultimately, it's about giving teams in these product development teams that are, cross-functional engineering, product, product management, testing, UX and design, like all those things, giving them like empowerment to solve business problems and not just saying like, here's something to go build, go and do it and tell me when you're done. And so you often hear these concepts of like outcome over output. And that's really like what you've got to like unpack what that means. And that's what it means. It's like the outcome is the problem you're solving. The output becomes like, the thing you're delivering. And we want teams, engineers, in my mind, especially, to stay focused on the ultimate outcome you're trying to deliver. And so just one other add-on here, and, we think about agile a lot in the agile methodology. I'm a big proponent, but really like that started as like a manifesto. And then what happens is over time, it becomes like this series of ceremonies and items you're going through and sort of checking off your list. And that's where you've got to be careful, because it can start to turn into like output. If you're just thinking about like being very project focused and you're just turning agile, like a project with agile on top, you're losing sight of the outcomes you're trying to get to.
100%. I've experienced that exact thing where it's just turned into, in fact, this has been mentioned a few times on our series, where people lose the spirit of agile. It becomes more of a practice, and we kind of lose the magic, actually, so I think that's really important. So as part of product development, how do you balance, feature development? Because sometimes there's things, how do you balance feature development and user experience and performance? This is kind of balance that you got to find.
Yeah, I think it's true. So I think there have to be some non-negotiables, and I've gone through this with several of my teams around like, what I would call just like table stakes around sort of performance and operational standards that you want to follow. So you can think of, SLOs that you're setting within your teams, things that you want to ensure are always part of the experience. And a lot of times, what I've seen is especially if you're like in a startup mode and you're growing fast, those things come after the fact, right? You get to this element of scale and you're like, we're starting to hit performance bottlenecks or latency bottlenecks. So you want to come back and apply it after the fact. It's much harder then, right? So if you're building with these things up front, in terms of what is that experience we want to ensure customers and users have every time? If you're building that up front, then it becomes easier to scale over time.
Yeah.
But honestly, a lot of times what we're doing early on is we're chasing features and functionality because that's what's going to get us the growth and the scale or the sales.
Yes.
And so I think, what I would just say is like, first and foremost, let's get those foundational things at least understood. And then we can add later on when we maybe have a feature and it's like, okay, that's going to bring up our SLO here a few hundred milliseconds. We can have that trade-off conversation versus just building it and then dealing with the consequences after.
Sure, yeah. And coming back to your conversation around, business and users, and keeping the focus on that, because techies will just go off and do what needs to be done. They'll solve the problem. Is that quite is it quite a hard conversation to have that with the business, so to speak? Because I guess they want lots of features. They want to be able to put stuff on nice marketing material and saying we got this, and this will be another add-on for your usage.
Right. I think it's one of those things where business users and leaders, and understandably, right, like they're counting on us as tech leaders to ensure these things happen. And that's why I use the wording around table stakes. They kind of take those things for granted. Another area would be like security, and the security of your platform. Like business leaders make assumptions that those things are built in. We're sure we're performance. We are minimizing downtime and we have high availability, like all these non-functional requirements. So yeah, they're thinking about, how we expand the feature and functionality and capabilities of our product or platform with the assumption that all these things are baked in. And so I often refer to those as like getting the simple things right, but they're not that simple. And we have to, we have to very intentionally think about how we incorporate these things into a product or platform, starting with telemetry. Do we have the visibility into all of these things, from a user perspective? And then starting with from telemetry, like what are the standards or SLOs that we want to make sure we are achieving? And then from there, then it gets easy. Like if you get those two things right, it gets easier to have the conversations when you have to start making these trade-off decisions.
Excellent. I guess I'm glad you brought that topic up because, telemetry metrics and measurements, so you can actually show how things are, and as you say, it makes that conversation a lot easier. Are there any particular metrics or telemetry metrics that you use that have been really useful for you?
I think it's to the problem at hand. And so, across, our systems here, for example, and at other places, is we have SLOs around, key workflows, and key, again, I always want to try and put it from what is we engineers often think about the services that they own, right? And so that's the architecture piece. But, those services in a service-oriented architecture come together to deliver workflows and capabilities for our customers. So think about those together and like, how long do we want it to to take for example, for a user to upload a file or to take this action within our platform. And then you instrument that, and like, how often do you want that? Do you expect that to fail, or what's an acceptable failure rate for that? And you instrument that. But thinking about it more from those workflows versus like, oh, I have service X that does this action. Like, users don't care about that. Like they care about like what they're trying to get done. And
Yes.
so I know I'm not answering your question specifically, but I would say just, really metrics and, the time it takes and the ease of completing those activities is what we're looking at.
I'm thinking of examples where I wish maybe these companies did have those metrics or were able to see it. If I'm having a problem in a particular feature or in a particular area of the software, and the metrics would show, well, these users seem to be going backwards and forwards between.
So yeah, what you're referring to are like usage metrics, which we also instrument. So it's not just about like the time, but like how often are people taking it, are people behaving, are users behaving in a way that we anticipated when we built this feature, right?
Yes.
So too often, we're just focused on, again, the output. So it's like, can we get that out the door? Can we get that feature out the door? We're not coming back with that feedback loop and saying, well, is it actually having the impact that we wanted to? And so I think, here we've taken a very proactive approach to instrumenting in a way where we can get that information and feed that back in. And so, a lot of times, you see here all these statistics around like how many ideas actually wind up working. And this is a little bit different than the failure I was referring to earlier. But, you can hear people like Steve Jobs and others saying like, most ideas are going to fail, right? And so if we don't know that they've failed, so users aren't taking advantage or aren't adopting, what we've put out there, then all we're doing is we're continuing to add, right? So the platform becomes more additive and additive and additive over time, which adds complexity, which adds confusion. So, if something is not working or people aren't adopting it for whatever reason, then shut it down, right? And so like the whole goal, in my mind, over and over, I just think about sort of simplicity in a lot of ways, whether it be simplicity of architecture, simplicity from a user experience to just as quickly get to what they want to get done.
Yeah.
Do it. And so I think those kind of metrics help us keep an ever-growing platform as, simplistic and as streamlined as it can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to your point earlier on around, the metrics help you keep that focus on the user, and also the business, because obviously the business has a reflection of that. There's nothing like people find a competitor which is going to does the job easier or isn't so much of a pain as some of the other processes and workflows that you've got out there. Somebody else will solve it. Somebody else will solve it if you don't solve it. So you might as well go through the effort and see it before somebody else does.
Yeah.
I've got a question here around, because I know you've had some experience around startups and scaling, and we talked about some of the challenges of that, where you go from a startup mode into a kind of like I think I used the word rather than being ultra agile, you kind of have to calcify a little bit and become more kind of rigid and process driven, what have you. So speak to some of the critical inflection points that you've noticed on some of these journeys around startups and scaling.
Yeah, I think in startups, you almost naturally by default act in the manner that we were referring to earlier, right? Like you're wearing many hats. Even if you're an engineer, you're thinking about the product more that you're building. You're often very close to the customer. You're talking with the customer, you're talking with the sales team, and many times these are the same people doing the same jobs. And so you just naturally, I would say, blur across function. And as you scale, by default, and I think rightly so, we start to get aligned more to our functional focus areas. That's a good thing. But then as we start to reach other points of scale and we get further and further siloed in these functions and I guess more protective of like staying in your own lane.
Yes.
And I think that's, again, this is all on a spectrum. To a certain degree, you have to do that. Like you have a role to play, you need to do that. But when where you start to lose me is when engineers, don't think that like the product outcome, that they should be measured on, product outcomes or, how well the product is doing and things like that. They think they should just be measured on output. And so, and to tie it back to like the product operating model earlier, it's like you want everyone to come from this mindset of like, what are our shared outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and keep that in mind. And, engineers should be able to say, does that roadmap priority, make sense, and like help me understand why it does. And a product manager should be able to say, okay, tell me about why you're taking that approach to solving this problem architecturally. And, as we think ahead and, look at where we want to be a year from now, is that solution going to make sense for us? Like you want these powerful conversations to happen no matter what your size is. And I feel like as we reach a certain scale, we get in, again, more into this sort of checkbox mindset, similar to what we were talking about with agile. It's like, well, I'm an engineer or I'm a product manager. We need these 5 things before we can go to the next like gate in our process. You start to lose like, well, what is the value I'm trying to get from these 5 things? Well, 5 things are important. I'm not saying we don't have artifacts or frameworks. I am a huge fan of all of those things. But where, when you start to only care about those things for the sake of themselves versus what you're trying to achieve, that's where, things start to derail quickly. And I think to me, that's the key of scaling a large organization and making those transitions at those inflection points is keeping people grounded on the value that they're trying to get out of everything that they're doing, and making sure that those powerful conversations are happening, because that's, you want an engineer to have the perspective that they can influence the design or the product roadmap and vice versa. And so that's where the power comes in, and where you can really, move with speed and move with intention and deliver products that customers actually want and ultimately.
And where have you seen good examples of where you've actually managed to mitigate that falling asleep into, creating these silos? Because as you describe it, I've seen loads of examples where this has happened, and it doesn't happen overnight. It just kind of creeps in. It's this kind of like deep, creepy thing that, and before you know it, it's just the way it is. It's kind of developed a culture by accident of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen examples, again, when I think about what is my role, and every technical leader, you're going to hear different things about what they think their role is, and none of them are wrong. They're all right. And a lot of it usually comes from like, what are you passionate about? And so this is something I'm passionate about. So I would say, I've seen examples of where teams are like going off the rails a bit. And like, I see my role is like helping to bring that back. And so there's different techniques to do that. I think, one is like how you shield them and keep them focused. So a lot of times I've had a situation where I've come into a team like super, low morale. They were getting beat up for everything, lots of incidents, lots of errors. And so it becomes this like, doom loop over and over, right? And so how do you get out of that? And so there's a few ways to, that I've approached that is like, one is you try and get them a bit of a buffer, right? Like, how can I go with my peers and my leadership and say, look, we're going to need some space to get out of what we're doing. Here's what I can say that we're going to give you over the next 30, 60, 90 days, right? And a lot of it becomes like visibility into what we're trying to solve and how we're doing that. And then with the team, I found that you have some folks that are sort of past the point of no return. Like they don't think that there's a way out of it. And you've got to recognize that. And as a leader, help them move to a place where they can add value, and whatever situation that might be. So you got to get a team that still has optimism and belief that they can turn it around.
Yeah.
And then you've just got to show those small incremental wins as you're building that space. I think a lot of times we let teams like this that are flailing, and I've been a part of a few, that becomes the whole narrative. Even if they're doing good things, you don't see their good things. You just see the negative, and that becomes the story and the optics. And you know how these things happen. It's like you've got to change that narrative and influence others and point out like, here are some of the good things we're doing, and we know we still have these problems, but here's where we're making progress.
Yes.
Slowly over time, people start to believe, and it's not about like tricking them. It's like, it's the reality is like, and once that momentum starts to grow, like it feeds upon itself, just like the negative momentum does as well. And so, there's one team in particular I'm thinking about at a prior company where I came in and it was doomsday, and it took us like 6 months to get to the point I'm talking about, but it was like baby step at a time, and then telling the good story to both the team and others around you, then the next good story, then the next good story, and them starting to believe they could do it. And eventually we became one of the highest performing teams within the organization.
Wow.
Because of that shift. So
excellent. A sign of great leadership. I think, I feel really inspired by that, because I think all healthy systems have good, healthy feedback loops. And as leaders, we're the strongest feedback loop into the system. Is what we're noticing and what we're presenting back. So I think that's a really good shout out there. That when people are doing well, when they think everything's not going so well, it's really important. It sounds really simple, but it makes it easier. I know I've been at that end of it, and it's good. So here we go. On leadership then, what are the skills that differentiate, this is a tough one maybe, differentiate great leaders from good ones?
Yeah. There's actually a book on this called Good to Great.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right.
And I actually, some of the philosophies, well, really it's all research based, and some of the takeaways from that book really resonate with me. So I think, one, being a good listener, even though we're talking a lot right now, it's like, when I enter a new organization, I am in like listening mode for a while, right? And really listening, not just, trying to hear what you want to hear, and showing that empathy and understanding, why things are why they are and the history behind things. So it's very easy for us, and we always do this, engineers as well. Think about engineers going into an existing code base. They're always like, well, I want to rewrite that because we're written better, right? And so what we don't have and never can have is like that full historical experience of how things got to exactly where they are.
Yeah.
But you want to try and get as much of that as you can, because even though things might be bad and you're like, why in the world would you have done that? There's a reason. People aren't intentionally doing things bad, and people generally are smart that we're working with. So it's like, there's reasons. So understand and listen to that. And, you know, for me, I'm one of those technology leaders that's like not, you know, writing code. And I know that for some of your podcasts, like everybody's got an opinion on that. That said, I do think it's incumbent upon me to really understand and be able to challenge our architecture, the decisions we're making as we develop new features and get clarity on that. And yeah, and sort of build my trust and the folks on my team's trust that, you know, we're doing the right thing. And so I would say I personally don't feel like I need to be in the code to do that. And I think once you get to a certain size, you can't be in all the code, right? So you would have to pick and choose anyway. And so for me, it's more about, do I understand our architecture? Are we making the right decisions for scale and growth and reliability, things like that? And I think it's a leader's job to have sort of that bigger picture understanding of how all these little decisions that teams are making impact like that bigger picture, and then communicate that. Like, teams need to understand the bigger vision in addition to what their individual mission is and how it all fits together. So for me, I think it's being able to listen, hear, and understand, you know, teams and team members' perspectives, being able to, you know where our platform is, where it's going, and get everyone as close as I can to understanding and align on that picture. And then, you know, I think it's also about being this evangelist for our team. What are we doing? Being that business connection that we talked about earlier at the exec level. And so those are things that stand out to me. And really, you know, we're all trying to get to the same things. And so it's like, how do we balance like the urgency we feel with a lot of things with enabling our teams to stay focused and to get those outcomes achieved? Like, that balance, that's a day in, day out thing. Well, particularly in today's world, it's apparent to everybody. Like, every day we wake up, something's changed. And so it's like, do you run and chase that change, or do you, you know, sometimes you do, or do you keep the team focused on what they're doing?
Yeah.
But that's tough. And pulling that puzzle together, I think, is what a tech leader is ultimately accountable for doing.
Yeah. And coming back now, turning back to yourself, you know, in your journey, I imagine, you know, your leadership approach has changed during, you know, working with different size companies and different companies, different teams. Any particular lessons around that you'd like to share here?
So in a few ways, one is like how hands-on you are, and you know, how much of the lower level detail you're able to see and get into and drive. But one thing that I've kept consistent is like, I don't think I certainly don't, and I'm not, and I don't think others should expect leaders to be the best at like a particular function, right? And a particular skill set. Like, I want to have like the best architect. You know, I don't want to be the best architect in the room, and I don't want to be the best, you know, programmer in the room. And so, you know, I want to find these people and then figure out a way to get the most out of them and bring all of that together in a meaningful way. And so I think as you get into bigger and bigger roles, that becomes harder, because you then start to depend on other leaders to do that, right? So you're doing it more, in a smaller world. And then now it doesn't become about how do I identify the best like functional skill set talent? How do I start to identify the best like management talent that can start to do some of these things? And then how will I identify the best, management and leadership talent that can do this, a bit more at scale? So you think about, okay, I can do this with one team. Now, how do I do it with 3 teams? Now, how do I do that with 30 teams? Like, right. And so for me, it's like, as that growth has happened, both in my career and the companies I've worked with, it's like, it really becomes about how am I identifying like the right people for those roles.
Yes.
And those are different things you have to look for. And ultimately it does come down to the right people and trust, two-way trust. And it's just like at what level you're doing that.
So that art of finding the right people for the right seats, that is an art in itself, isn't it? Have you nailed it?
I wish I could say I had, but like, look, we're all people. So like, ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Like, that's, we're always gonna not get it perfectly right because we're people. And like, there's gonna be failure in systems because like, ultimately as people building systems, obviously, with AI, more and more of that is becoming like systems, building systems. But like when it comes down to it, like they're if you keep unpeeling the onion, like there's a person there, right? And so, to answer your question, no, I haven't figured it out, but there's certainly, over X number of years of doing this, there's certain things that I know tend to work well in certain types of situations. And, I think I've gotten a little better at identifying those qualities. And again, keeping with the puzzle analogy, it's like the right person for the right role at the right time, like that's going to be unique. And so you have to think about that in each of those situations. Look for those. So
it is a multidimensional. When you get it right, it's quite wonderful. But I think the great thing as leaders is that even when we don't get it quite right, it's how do we navigate that, and how do we bring out those qualities in people if it's possible. It's inspiring and teaching and growing.
Absolutely. And so when like how we started our conversation around like what am I passionate about and what inspires me, like that is at the core, is like when you see like that light bulb go up, or you see a leader or an individual like get to that level of mindset and understanding that you're looking for, and then they're starting to do things that you didn't even think of, and like that's the most rewarding part of the job, I think, for me.
So Drew, a question just come up in my mind, which I thought would be really useful for our conversation here and for our tech leader audience listening out there. What's the best piece of advice that you've been offered in your professional journey?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, like I'm sure most or all of your guests, I've been very fortunate with like the mentors and leaders that I've worked with over my career that have helped shape me into who I am. I think, there's a few things that stand out. One is focus on your strengths more than your weaknesses. So a lot of times, like we'll go through these, feedback sessions or, reviews, and it's all about like, here are the gaps, and how you can improve. But, what I tend to do because of this advice is tend to work with my team members on like, here are the strengths, here's what I want you to do more of, right? And so you don't want to like completely disregard the weaknesses, be aware of them, get to a competency level, but do what you're best at and enjoy and get even better at it. Like, how do you hone that skill? I think the best leaders are the ones, getting back to the good to great reference a little bit, are the ones that create like principles, systems, frameworks that last long beyond them, right? Like you don't want to be like, if I were to leave an organization tomorrow, I think the worst thing that could happen is that, like, it starts to fall apart, right? It might make me look good, but in fact, it doesn't, right? Like, what you want to leave is a system and not
Yes.
like it about one person. And so I think that's been advice that I think about really as I go through day to day is like, how am I putting a system in place that's going to be scalable and long
Yeah.
and on me? And that gets back to some of the people you're identifying. All of those things are connected. I guess
Yeah.
this thing is like sit on an angry email or Slack overnight. Don't respond right away.
Yeah, that's right.
Rooted out a few times, and the next day, for some reason,
It doesn't seem with bad. Yeah. What do they call that? They call it flaming, rather than emailing, it's flaming, and you just need to kind of let it do its thing and what have you. But in fact, as a bit of a side note, I've noticed on LinkedIn sometimes, like, when there's kind of debates happening, so and you'll kind of like shoot back at somebody, and it actually just stop, and saying, "Are you sure you want to post this?"
Yeah, you'll see. I'm not. I'm not the most active social media guy for that reason. So
Yeah, that's right. But I think having that mental check just to say, just sleep on this. It seems like absolutely the right thing to do to react to something when in the space, but sometimes it's best just to give it some time. Let it do its thing. So as we come towards the closing arc of our time together, unfortunately, Drew, I want to ask you just some nice warm questions around your journey. Actually, I mean, so you've shared quite a lot of things around your advice around leadership and what have you. What about the journey to tech leadership? Because I mean, that's quite an interesting transition from being in the weeds to not being in the weeds.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like for me personally, right? Like you have things that you're interested in and that you're passionate about, but you don't really know where it's going to take you. I mean, my journey has, I certainly wouldn't have plotted it the way it went. But I do think over time, you start to crystallize, what gets you out of bed in the morning and what motivates you. And so I would say, honestly, job after job after job, I get more and more excited about like Monday morning, right?
Oh, wow.
Don't get me wrong. I like my personal time, and when we're talking about optimization, a lot of it I think is rooted in like my just tendency to be lazy, right? So I want to make the most value of my time as possible. But I guess what I would say is like, earlier in my career, I was kind of feeling I knew things that I liked and wanted to be involved in. I always wanted, like, even when I was, programming, I still had an element to my job that was like sort of people oriented or business oriented. So I started in like back in the day, one of GE's sort of famous training programs, and like those, like that just, it made it such an impact on me early on because I was not only learning and implementing and acting from a technical perspective, you're forced to answer business questions and take business classes. We were taking finance classes and things like that. So all of that was part of that program. And that shaped a lot of, like, I think, my career path, because if you look over the different things I've done, I've always tried to bridge that gap between the technology and business side, and just in sort of increasingly in large roles. So for me, it's like, understand like those things that you care most about, what motivates you, and then, just take each day as it comes, because you're not going to be able, and we all should think about our path forward, but we should also know that it's going to change many times over as we go through it. So
yeah, I think that's very wise, very wise. And any books? You mentioned GE they did a great program that kind of helps you along the way. Any books or any other training programs that have helped?
I should read more. I read a lot of the newsletters, so Stratechery, Pragmatic Engineer. But one book that, a bit of a plug here for me is The Art of Scalability. And so I worked with the authors for a while, Marty Abbott and Mike Fisher, who are huge mentors of mine. And so One, I love the title, The Art of Scalability, because, again, like we've referenced like checklist thinking and frameworks, and those are important, and you want to follow like a scientific method to things. But ultimately, it's fluid. And so things change, and there's not a one size fits all approach to scalability. And these guys are super technical, like have immense technical backgrounds, like really created a lot of principles around distributed systems and scaling systems and all of that. But the core of the message of the book is it comes down to people and org, and like, ultimately when you start to unpack failures in your systems, you can trace them back to people decisions. And so how do we safeguard against that and things like that? But it's the lessons and principles in that book. I mean, it's probably 10 plus years old at this point, but are pretty timeless and applicable for a while. So
I'm going to add that to my list of books to read, because I think it is an art, scaling, and I've seen it go not so well, and it's good to kind of learn off people that have blazed the trail before. So
absolutely
great. And I'm going to offer you a wish. I'm going to be a tech genie. I love this bit because I always wonder what's going to pop up. What would you wish for from the tech genie, for your leadership, for your people, for maybe your industry?
Right. Well, doesn't a genie get 3 wishes, or no?
Not this one. This one's a bit tight.
There's a lot there. I would say probably, if we're just snapping our fingers and making magic happen, like a solution to like unlimited clean energy that powers our people, our planet, for all of the needs that we have,
Yes.
They're like economic infrastructure, like adoption, integration, trade-off of that, but you're a genie, you're going to make all that go away. But I think if we can figure that out, humanity's in a pretty good spot.
I think, so I'm going to interact with that wish because I think it's coming true, and I'm just going to help it along, kind of thing. In fact, I'm really fascinated with, the advancements in energy generation, especially democratizing it so people are able to create their own. And for example, we've got 14 solar panels on our roof, kind of thing, so we can and I think that revolution is really starting to get traction. So
I agree.
It sometimes feels like we're not getting anywhere, but we're actually getting somewhere. And you get these beautiful infographics where they show you the transition between different energy sources, for example, oil and coal, and how solar is predicted to kind of the wind and some of the other ones as well. So I think your wishes come true.
I am with you, and I follow it too, and I see the advancements. Like it's happening, and it'll happen over time, and I have a confidence in it as well. But it'd be great if we could just fast forward a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Let's speed it. That's what I'm going to do. I was going to turn up the speed volume on it, a little bit. That's great. And so as we come to the final full stop of the podcast, unfortunately, with our time together, what's the main key takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience as we part company?
Yeah, I think we felt a lot about, staying grounded in the business outcomes we're trying to achieve. I would say just one more take on that would be remembering the power of like influence. And so a lot of times as engineers, I think offline we've talked about like Toastmasters and things like that. As engineers, we lose sight of how we communicate what we want to get done, right? And so even if I want to be an IC engineer and I'm happy programming for the rest of my life, you still have to know how to influence people, right? And get them understanding what you're trying to achieve. And so things like knowing your audience, speaking in terms that your audience understands. Again, like how do I take tech language and translate it into what's going to be meaningful for a business or different functional audience, and tell a story. I know I haven't told too many today, but like there's a technique to telling a story, like learn it, practice it. And then finally, just be genuine in who you are. People can tell if you're not. And so just be yourself. And like that will be more influential than anything because people will see the passion of what you're trying to do. So
Absolutely. Great note to finish on. And I can really underline that. I think communication is the key, and it comes in lots of different forms. So thank you for your time, Drew. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's been wonderful having you on CTO Confessions.